California is really meaningful to me personally. It's always going to draw the brightest people in the world. New York is ahead of San Francisco in fintech. People in San Francisco have gotten way more politically active. The network effect is so strong. I'm excited for the next 10, 20, 30 years of all that kind of stuff to happen. It just makes me so happy and proud to be a Californian.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the California Future Society podcast. This week, I have a great one for you. I have Sheel of Better Tomorrow Ventures. They're an early stage, fintech-focused VC fund based in San Francisco. Sheel is just a great guy with a great energy. He has a fun, playful zeal to him. It comes through in the way that he talks. For those of you who see him on Twitter or elsewhere, you know this about him. So I had a lot of fun just talking to him about how San Francisco's tech scene compares to New York, Miami, or other cities, and why Sheel is currently in New York scouting out talent for their startup accelerator. We talk about whether or not California will ever lose its status as the leader of global innovation. We talk about the types of startups that Sheel would like to see more of in the world, as well as just some of his thoughts about the future of California and his hope for the state and why he loves it here so much. So I know you're going to enjoy the conversation, especially if you're in the tech or fintech world, if you're a builder who thinks about the state, or you're just someone who cares about the future of California. I know you're going to enjoy it. As always, make sure to subscribe at californiafuturesociety.com or wherever you're hearing this. Here's Sheel. How are you doing today? And thanks for jumping on.
I'm doing really well. One thing we mentioned, I just over the weekend did a long walk, 35 miles. So my feet are hurting a little bit, but otherwise doing well.
Well, one way I like to start off these conversations is ask, what's your connection to California?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Moved to California after being in some other places in 2012. And since then, I've kind of become your classic California stereotype. I am a venture capitalist. I like to hike. I go to Burning Man, all the various things that you would imagine from somebody who lives in San Francisco. The backstory is I run a venture fund. It's called Better Tomorrow Ventures, BTV for short. We back early stage fintech startups, sort of shaping the financial system. And California is really meaningful to me personally. I think it's really, I'm fortunate that I got the chance to move there in 2012 and really it's shaped who I am in tremendous ways. I think it was really moving there that exposed me to much more of the exciting world of tech and really encouraged me to think a lot bigger than I was before. And I was living in Chicago.
Well, I'm glad, you check the VC boxes. We don't want VCs who don't go to Burning Man, things like that. We want tried and true people who live up to the reputation. So glad you checked those boxes. Well, the name of your venture, right? It's Better Tomorrow Ventures. And, average person may not always equate human impact when they think about fintech, when they think about that. But obviously, positive visions of the future are embedded in kind of your thesis and how you invest and what you're hoping for. And I know through other work and nonprofit work and whatnot, you really care about the financial system's ability to include people and things like that. So tell me more about your hope for the future of fintech and particularly those human aspects that people might not assume right off the gate.
Yeah, for sure. So you're absolutely right. The name Better Tomorrow it means two things. It means one, we're investing for a better future. And we do think financial technology is a great way to improve people's lives because people's lives are very much intertwined in their finances. But also Better Tomorrow is improving ourselves. Like, what can I be doing better tomorrow is sort of another second meaning of the word, the term. Let's see. Now, I mentioned, I think finance disproportionately has the ability to impact people's lives. I sort of started my fintech career on the nonprofit side with a nonprofit called Kiva. And with Kiva, I actually had moved to India to find microfinance institutions that they could partner with. Kiva is a website where people, primarily in the developed world, can make 0% interest loans to individuals in the developing world for the sake of alleviating poverty. In working at Kiva, I was riding a bus and getting on the back of somebody's motorcycle to serve one borrower and realized this is highly inefficient. And I realized why the loans are so expensive. And I thought, finance is something, microfinance and fintech is something that can solve this problem with technology. And that's part of the initial reason why I started investing in fintech. And then I also just think it's a tremendous opportunity.
Well, I know thinking about not only the tremendous opportunity of it, but you're someone who I associate with like a playful zeal when it comes to thinking about tech and like being willing to try new things. I know a story that
Yeah.
circulates online is like your wedding in the metaverse. Like when you
Yeah.
think about fintech or other tech, like when you think, let's say by like 2050, what gets you excited for future generations? Either it's things that you're investing in or elsewhere, like at the top of your list. I realize it's a super broad question. Take it whatever direction you want to, but what areas of life do you see as improving most dramatically over the next, let's say, 25 years?
Yeah. So sticking to my fintech background, I would say there are just things every day that pop up that are so complicated that shouldn't be. I think, you know, I think about my business owner. I have a friend who owns a bunch of businesses in San Francisco, a bunch of restaurants. And every week he's like exporting a bunch of things from one app to another and then importing them somewhere else. And like, that's a very simple thing that is a coordination problem. There's no technology that we need to solve it, but it's something that can be solved. And so based on information from him running these restaurants, I've tried to solve it with some of the companies we've invested in. But in general, I just think, everything we do, from getting a mortgage, getting a loan, working with a bank, opening a new bank account, getting insurance, all of these things are done poorly. It leads to a bad customer experience, and then also are actually mispriced. So if you could price better, you might be able to incentivize the right kind of behaviors. And we just as a society are not doing those things. So I'm excited, for the next 10, 20, 30 years of all that kind of stuff to happen. The last thing I'll say is a lot of people talk about how we don't have great financial education. And people point to all of the various things that are going on in people's lives, people taking on too much debt, this credit-based economy, all sorts of stuff. I think, yes, I do think we could do a better job of educating people about their finances. And maybe we should teach a personal finance class in high school. But I also think that some of this stuff is inherent and some of it we can fix with technology. Like we can automate people's financial lives in a way such that it leads them away from those temptations. And I'm interested in that.
Tell me more. Are you talking about like nudges, like where you have to opt out of putting some money in your 401k versus actively opting in, like that level? Or are you thinking in another scale as well?
No, I'm thinking of stuff like that. And the example you gave is a great one. And there's so many other things like that. But those kind of things can have a real impact and like right now, people really don't save any money. Americans barely save any money when they retire. On average, I think 85% of their money or 85% of their wealth is in their home. And the only reason it's in their home is because you can't get the money out.
No, I think a lot of that stuff, like there are killer apps in finance. Like if you're an expat, being able to transfer money back home with no fees or something, like those types of things are game changing. But a lot of the stuff you're describing, even if on their own, they might not be game changing, the cumulative effect, particularly for people who struggle to save or have been excluded historically, like those could be really big cumulative effects over the long term. Well, I want to pivot a little bit. This podcast is all about the future of California. And I feel like fintech, more than other sectors within tech, people talk about whether or not the center of gravity could be in New York, could be elsewhere. I know you're just saying you're in New York, basing your accelerator there. Tell me more about like New York versus SF and fintech, and also whether or not you think that California's advantage as the center of tech, specifically in fintech, do you think that's ever vulnerable in our lifetimes of going elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I actually think right now, New York is ahead of San Francisco in fintech. And I think if you look at the overall sort of like leaderboard of financings at seed stage, so only looking at seed stage because, the past is the past, but let's look at what's happening in the future. And that's seed stage financings. If you look at across sectors, San Francisco leads in every sector, probably except for biotech and fintech, biotech Boston and fintech New York. And I think it's pretty close. I think it's, maybe 5-10% delta, but the delta is actually growing, and New York has really come into its own in the last 5 years or so. And I think that's fine. I think, look, for a lot of reasons, it makes sense to be close to where the banks are. And New York is the financial hub of this country. So it makes sense that a lot of fintech would be here too. Especially the fin part of fintech, right? Then there's the tech part of fintech. And that actually, I think it's just so hard to compete in San Francisco. The network effect is so strong, and it really comes out in so many different ways. They're just like little advantages you have by being based there. I'll give you a few examples.
Yeah.
We had a company that launched an iPhone app, like when they were starting, just a seed company. And, the founder in San Francisco at a party met the guy at Apple who was responsible for like new finance app launches. And he met him at a party, and he was like, "Oh, I really love this app." Like that he saw at the party and ended up featuring it in the App Store. And that kind of like really small thing, maybe it gave them a 25% boost when they launched, but those kind of things really add up and compound and are super valuable. One thing I've noticed in New York that even though I think it's a great place for fintech and we have a lot of companies here, I think it's pretty behind from a tech perspective as compared to San Francisco. So I've been here for 2.5 months now, and for the most part live in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, there's never been a single time when I was the expert in tech or AI. Never once.
Yeah.
Like there's always somebody who's way smarter than me teaching me about everything. Here, I would say so many occasions, dinner table conversation with 10 or 15 people and the topic of AI, and like I'm clearly the expert. And it's strange for me. I think I like to know what's going on, but I don't think of myself as an expert. But I'm able to explain all this stuff to people here, and it's very surprising to me. I'm talking about being in a room of people who are, like unicorn founders in fintech, and I'm surprised they aren't familiar with things like advanced voice mode on ChatGPT or Operator, how it works. Like these are things that just living in San Francisco, you kind of just absorb, but it's not the case here. And I've noticed it's a market difference. So yeah, that's something I found to be unique.
There's like a coinable phrase there. I'm not sure what it is. It's something like that experience of like, you're like, oh, if I'm your expert, you're in trouble, right? Like there should be other people who can, speak about this. But yeah, I mean, that's something when I talk to people about the future of California, it comes up time and time again, right? You're in San Francisco or the Valley, like you throw a stick, you hit an engineer. And those network effects are so powerful. Some people argue like it doesn't matter whether there's political dysfunction, it doesn't matter taxes or anything else. Like particularly in the software side, hardware is kind of a different story where you have to build real things. But like some people argue that advantage is like never going, like, Miami can have COVID, whatever, like it's all going back. So I'm curious, like what, if there's any factors that would ever lead to San Francisco losing that advantage. I don't know if that's the case. But yeah, it's something that comes up a lot.
Yeah, I think, I think, some folks really made an effort with Miami, and, I've given them a lot of shit on Twitter, but they made an effort. I think it's just very hard to dislodge a network effect. If you're trying to hire the best people, like they're in San Francisco. The best AI engineers today are in San Francisco. We have AI companies in New York, and the talent is harder to find than it is out there. There's no question about it. And dislodging that is very difficult. Like dislodging any network effects business is, it's just really hard because of the density of people doing things that you want. Like you have to get a lot of people out of there. And, a lot of VCs really wanted Miami to be a thing. And of course, for the VCs, it's especially valuable to not have to pay California taxes. But it was hard to draw talented folks who want to work at startups there. It didn't work. They couldn't build the ecosystem. I think San Francisco, in particular, and California in general, have so many things that make startups great. And the ecosystem of great universities, some of the smartest people on the planet moving there, and the venture capital industry combining is just a powerful combo. And it's hard to get that anywhere else.
Let's talk about like the future of California. And is there anything that you feel like, oh, I wish this one thing could be fixed? Anything that you feel like California? We're singing its praises. Obviously, like the network effects of tech are durable. They're going to be true. But there's also a lot of things that people wish, in some ways feel like California is almost being held back in spite of all of this incredible tailwinds that it has. Is there anything that like is top of your list of if I was, made governor for a day or something of that nature? Like what would Sheel be thinking about or dreaming about?
Yeah, I think, look, California and Newsom maybe in particular, but not just Newsom. I think we're always trying to solve the world's problems. And like we're spending a lot of money to, I don't know, for something that's not our problem. Like, I don't know, reparations or something like that. Like why should we in San Francisco try to solve this problem? It's not us. Or there's so many things like that. Like we have props all the time that are like, really feel like they have little to do with California. It's really like solving a nationwide problem. Like, why are we doing this shit? And then like we're fighting a stupid culture war the same way that the Republican states are as well. Like we're doing the same shit. So I hate all that stuff. And then I would say sort of number one topic that I think we need to do more of, and this is in part based on my time in New York, is actually like build housing. Housing is the most expensive thing that most people spend their money on every month. And we can be doing a lot to make it cheaper, namely, supply and demand. We can be building more supply. And I feel very strongly that will bring more prosperity to all of us. And then, being in New York, I'd say one thing that's interesting that I've learned over the past few months, or thought about more, is here, housing in the areas in Manhattan where I live are extremely expensive, is extremely expensive. But, because public transportation is so good, you can go further out and it actually gets fairly reasonable. And so you have a bunch of labor, like the folks, our cleaners are cheaper here. Like talking to restaurant owners, like their staff is cheaper than it is in San Francisco. And it's because people can get from their cheap housing into the city affordably. And we just don't have that in the Bay Area. Like you can't, anywhere you go an hour away, it's still very expensive. And so that's something that if we could solve or make a dent in would be better for everyone.
Yeah. And that's something that we had one of my earlier episodes. I had that one of the senior directors of Cali and Beyond. We were talking about the housing crisis and and what they're working. No, because it's so true. And it's something that I feel like a lot of tech people is obviously a broad term. That's like a huge generalization, but of all the industries in California, it may be the one that is least vulnerable, at least because on the upper end, people make a lot of money. So it's like San Francisco is crazy. The Valley is crazy in terms of prices, but of any industry, speaking broadly, they're the industry that can afford it. But like you're saying, there's like a social fabric that breaks down when, sure, your AI engineers might be able to afford a condo, but when the cleaners can't, when the restaurant owners can't, when all these other people who like teachers, firefighters, like all the people you need for a cohesive society, when that breaks down, it really does like ripple up in weird ways that you don't always anticipate. And I think so many of California's political challenges will just be that dynamic playing out until this issue gets turned around. So I think that's a great comparison on the New York versus San Francisco point.
And like all this, CEQA reform, permitting reform. I know this is sort of like going off tangent, but like I renovated my place a few years ago, and it took probably a year and a half longer than it should have because of permitting issues. And in one case I had to, and so that was, time that there was an unoccupied residence in San Francisco. It's kind of a big deal. I tore down a wall that a like Stanford trained structural engineer who told me to. And then the city told me I couldn't do that. And I had to put the wall back up. So there's all sorts of stuff that is blocking growth that kind of sucks. Trying to think of other. I'd say that's by far my number one thing. I'd love to see more public transit. It's tricky because when you talk about public transit, people can obviously bring up high speed rail, and there's a real boondoggle we have in California.
Yeah.
I can't profess to know all of what's going on there, but clearly, that timeline is insane. I don't know if my kids will ever go from Los Angeles to San Francisco in a high-speed fashion. But I feel like we've just had fairly bad governance over time and not a lot of great controls. And so tech, to your earlier point, is really working in spite of the government, not in cooperation with, which is unfortunate.
Does that affect your portfolio and the types of companies you invest in? I know so much of fintech is at the federal level, but there are issues that are state specific. Does regulatory risk, policy risk come up when you're doing diligence and thinking about the types of companies that you invest in, or is it more just monitoring at the federal level and that's it?
Yeah, so there are local laws that do impact companies, but it's not really something you can do much about. So there are a lot of things that are still regulated at the state level that honestly shouldn't be. You need money transmitter licenses at the state level. You need lending licenses at the state level. But there isn't much that California can or should be doing differently that's coming to my mind off the top of my head. So regulation is super important, and we've seen, a lot of bad regulation. We've seen actually the perils of too much regulation and the perils of not enough regulation, both in my portfolio. But at a state level, I don't think there's that much that California should be doing.
Yeah. So you're someone who, you're inundated with pitches all day. People are coming to you and pitching ideas. Are there pitches, topics, problems that you wish more founders were looking at or thinking about?
I have a lot of ideas for startups that are something I want to see, but probably isn't going to make enough money.
The TAM of one, and it's Sheel. Yeah.
Yeah. No, well, actually, there's one that I posted about last week, which is I missed this app called Detour. Did you ever use it?
No, but I saw your tweet about it. Yeah, tell me more about it for those who don't know.
So it was really cool. It started in San Francisco, and it was Andrew Mason, the founder of Groupon. He started this app. This is now over a decade ago, and you could walk into a place and it'd say in your ears, it would say look to the left, you'll see such and such, and it would tell you about it. And it would give you a very cool tour of the city that you're in. And I'd love to see that come back. So I've been working on it a little bit, and I pitched the idea to Brian Chesky at Airbnb, and I said, hey, what didn't work for them was they had to acquire customers, but you guys have the customers and people in various cities, and you have this Airbnb's experiences product, but you could have one that's 90+% gross margins. How about that?
Yeah. Did he bite? So can we look forward to this in the near future?
He responded with, I loved Detour. So he didn't say I'm going to build it, but who knows, maybe.
Ask out the hot girl at school and she's like, you're a great person. It's
but what else? Another idea I've thought about working on, I'm not going to, but is sort of what better designed hotels. And you could do a lot to eliminate the major costs, and something akin to capsule hotels in Japan, but a lot of great common areas, but smaller rooms. And then there are things part of the expense in hotels is actually labor. Turning over the room costs $20-25. And I think you can do a lot to make things faster there. So that was one idea. And you can also check people in via their phone. There's a bunch of stuff that I don't know why it doesn't happen already, but another idea for you.
I love those. And one thing I wanted to talk about too is I saw a quote of yours. Forgive me, I'm misplacing where you said it, but it was talking about how a lot of companies claim to be AI enabled, claim to be AI powered, but how people overuse that hype, right? And that's natural to any hype cycle when money like the old Silicon Valley show, like when people are throwing bricks of cash at VR, like people just put AI in their tagline, right? Because
Yeah.
that's, catnip to VCs. But tell me more about what you meant by that and like what, um, I don't know, like 5, 10 years from now, when we look back on the current AI hype wave, like what types of things do you think are going to be, we might be laughing at, or like realize that maybe we're overblown in how we were thinking about it?
Yeah. So, interestingly, I'll say I don't think AI is overhyped at the moment. I think it's actually properly hyped. I do think we are seeing this wave of AI washing where companies put AI onto a rules-based workflow or some automation script. It's not really AI, or, if you're using OpenAI's API to autofill a form or to I don't know, OCR something, are you really an AI company? No. Um, and I've seen pure software companies that claim to be AI companies. So we're seeing too much of that, but the technology itself is, I think, amazing. And we are seeing some really cool stuff, and we are seeing non-AI companies use AI tremendously. An example is one of the companies in our portfolio. It's called Deck. They what they do is, are you familiar with Plaid? Like,
Yeah.
so they Plaid can via an API grab a bunch of stuff from a user's bank account with their permission. And so Deck does that for not banks. They do it for, like, you might need information from utilities or
Mm.
car data, or let's say you're a musician and I want to get your royalty data. That's a user permission login. So there's like a ton of examples. So these guys are building a company that does that, and they are actually using AI to do it under the hood. And these guys previously started a company that was not using AI because it was 6 years ago. And the advantage that they're seeing with AI is like 70x. It's so much faster to build, and each new integration is so easy to do and less prone to breakage because it's deterministic. And so it's just so cool what we're seeing from non-AI companies.
Yeah. I think that's super cool. And I never heard the term AI washing before, but I might have to steal that.
Please do.
But it's funny because I see that the negative impact of that in a lot of my work. I work with on policy issues. So I work for like trade associations for tech companies, and particularly at the state level, because there's like 900 plus AI related bills at the state level. And like closing my eyes, not even looking at the bill, I already know when it comes up, like there's going to be issues with definitions and scoping. It's already a challenging problem of how do you define AI just for technologists, but particularly for lawmakers when they like see something bad or they want to prohibit some bad behavior, like defining what is and isn't AI is actually thorny. And then it can be really challenging. A lot of companies are nervous about getting swept up in rules that weren't designed for them. But I think about that a lot in what you're just describing of how if every company claims to be AI, and that generates a lot of excitement for investors. It also generates a lot of fear for people who are concerned about AI's future going forward. Anyways, that's an aside, but that's something I think about a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you just reminded me of Scott Wiener's bill,
Yeah.
which I think would have really set the state back, set the state back in AI. Unfortunately, Gavin Newsom vetoed it, but I think brings up the idea that you talked about earlier, which is like local regulation and how important it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, are you cool talking about that a little more? Because I'm very interested in that topic. And so for people who don't know, like 1047, SB 1047 last year is Scott Wiener's bill to regulate frontier AI models, premised on the idea that the largest, most advanced AI models present the greatest amount of risk to society. And so we need a special class of regulations just for them. That specific bill came along with a lot of liability structures for developers. It wasn't, we were just talking about definitions and scoping. Like it had a lot of issues for the open source community about how do you even define who's the developer in these situations. It passed both houses, was vetoed by Newsom. But now this year, there's multiple frontier AI bills, not structured the same way as 1047, but other lawmakers have that issue and that idea is still out there. And one question I mean, feel free to opine on that in any direction, but I also have a question related to that is that feels like from where I was sitting, working at a public affairs firm that works with a lot of VCs and tech people, like that bill seemed like a unique moment of the tech community mobilizing and getting energized around a topic at the state level in particular, which I don't feel
Yeah.
like I see that a lot. Obviously, right now, nationally, with Elon and this administration, there's like the A16Z connection and a lot of other groups. Like there's a greater tech involvement in national politics, but particularly at the state level, I don't feel like we had seen that. And one of my pocket theories is like in the next 10, 20, 30 years, tech is going to become more influential at the state houses just because they can. Like I think it's like a mispriced kind of thing. Like I think it's worth the resources for them. But I don't know. Tell me more about like that bill and what take it in any direction you realize.
Yeah. I mean, I think regulating AI is very difficult. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I just think it shouldn't be done in California. Like, why is a state choosing to go after this difficult topic? And that bill in particular, if I remember correctly, had all sorts of strange definitions. And like, it's not necessarily true that only large models are risky. So like that was a strange amount of regulation or type of regulation. And then they didn't define things clearly. It just didn't make sense to regulate on a local level. And I feel like, it could have had an effect of folks leaving California. That might be a little far-fetched, but I don't know. It's just another example of the first thing we talked about, which is just California deciding to enact a change that they think the world should see, and it negatively impacts Californians and causes people to leave. And then I'm not, I'll be honest, I haven't been as up to date on the more recent bill.
You shouldn't be. It's a lifestyle choice that I've taken on that most people shouldn't, burden themselves with that type of boring following, monitoring state level bills. Yeah.
But I do think, I mean, to your point, obviously at a local level, and I know this isn't specifically what you're talking about, but at a local level, people in San Francisco have gotten way more politically active. Like I moved to San Francisco in 2012 and you kind of barely heard anything about local elections, to now, I think thanks to work of Sachin and Gary and many others.
Yeah, I had Sachin and Steven on
great.
fourth episode. Yeah, they were awesome.
So I think those guys have done a tremendous job in bringing about the importance of local politics to us. And then also like a lot of people are just like, what can I do? Who should I vote for? So some of these just simple things that seem simple, like a voting guide, are actually very valuable. And I think, now Grow SF itself is a force in local politics, which is very exciting. I do think we've seen another example at a state level would be insurance. So obviously there were the fires in LA in January were incredibly destructive. And I think a lot of people for the first time realized the reason that they were so destructive in part, and the reason why people didn't have insurance is in part due to the poor state of insurance in California. And that's in part the regulatory state and in part our insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, who has no training in insurance. He has like a bachelor's in journalism or something and then became our insurance commissioner, does not understand much about insurance. And the state insurers have been complaining for a long time. And we, of course, have other major problems with insurance, including the state needing to approve regulatory filings and sort of watchdog organizations getting paid to fight every new regulatory filing. Just makes for a really dysfunctional state. And I think people did not have any idea about that stuff. And probably, today in May, it's been a few months and people have already forgotten. But, they might remember some aspect of it and think about that when the next election comes around.
Yeah, my last guest, who's in the controller's office in LA, described it as we have an attention deficit democracy. Like people just, you don't pay attention to issues until it's broken. But also, I think that's how like the regulatory state and policy ought to work. It's kind of like your like IT security system. Like you don't want to think about defeating every DDoS attack that's coming across like at our website. Like you just want to like know my website's secure and that it's working. I think with policy too, it's like you don't want to think and wake up like most people. Is our insurance system working well in the state right now? If we have a big wildfire, like you don't want to think about it. But then when it doesn't work, it then draws people's attention to it, but then hopefully can be motivated to create fixes. I know with the Grow SF co-founders, they were talking about how like those school board recalls and some of those moments during COVID, it really got the average San Franciscan who typically may not have thought about politics to think about it. And then as a result, they were able to use that energy and that momentum to generate change. So I think like it takes those moments of outrage of people asking, like, shining the light on a situation and saying, what the heck's happening here, to then, engage in a way that hopefully can change it for the better. Well,
yeah, absolutely.
One question I wanted to always end on is kind of like, what's your hope for the future of California? Let's say we're talking again in 10 years, like what are some of the changes and things that you hope we already answered this with housing and other things like that. Is there anything else that you just hope for the future of the state that gets you excited about the future?
Yeah, I think it's just like, it's such an exciting and beautiful place to live. And I think it's always going to draw the brightest people in the world to it. And I think certainly, there are ways that California can mess things up, but I'd love to see a lot more, bringing it back to the earlier topic, less theater, more experimentation. Like we have this world-class talent. It's one of just California by itself would be, I think, the fourth biggest
as of
country
like 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
by GDP in the world. And so that's amazing. I think we have like that plus this beautiful place with extremely talented and smart people. And, it just makes me so happy and proud to be a Californian, to be honest.
Well, I'm proud you're a Californian too. Thank you for your time, Sheel. Really appreciate you taking time today to talk to me.
Absolutely.